got your coffee and your bagels this morning on Church Without Walls. Today we're talking about, I'm John and this is my bratty daughter.
Peyton.
Today we're talking about the Diminishing Christ.
Dad, proceed to the route.
Yeah. Last night, me and my bratty daughter, we watched the Passion of the Christ. Yeah, we did. And tonight we're gonna watch I Am David. And you know, you like that movie Amadeus, don't you? Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, we got the Batmans over here with his two girlfriends, huh?
Well, why don't you tell us what you thought of the movie? I mean, it's a rough movie.
Yeah, the
right,
Passion
to
of the
watch?
Christ. Lots of torture, but Jesus is really good. Very well done. Not even cheesy. That's crazy. I watched a lot of Jesus movies in my day, and a lot of them not that great. But this one, that's a well done movie, ain't it?
What did you think about it being filmed with, like, in the original languages with subtitles? Was that distracting to you, or did it feel more real?
Completely astounding, right? Completely astounding.
Are you trying to make fun of me? All right, more of that right after this. Are you done?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, thought so. All right. All right, now we gotta switch. You gotta do. I got us switching, folks. We thought we'd try and be each other this morning.
I have such a great you impression, don't I?
It was okay. It wasn't phenomenal. I was better as you than you were as me, because I see, like,
You play
Dad,
a character. You're
skip
cheating.
intro, Dad. All your little Peytonisms.
My Peytonisms.
Proceed to route. We better switch drinks, because I'm not sure what Mom put in mine. So the Diminishing Christ. We did watch Passion of the Christ last night. I hadn't seen it in a long time, in years, and Peyton had never seen it. It's not a movie you want to watch when you're feeling a little blue, I'll tell you that, because it could really push you over the edge. However, we are coupling it, as Peyton said, with the movie I Am David tonight. Let me just talk to you a little bit about that, because you might want to do this as a family. And then we're going to get into the Diminishing Christ. So the year that the Passion of the Christ was filmed, in the same year, two of the lead actors that were in the Passion of the Christ, the fellow who plays Jesus, Jim Caviezel, and the wonderful Bulgarian actor whose name escapes me, who played Pilate, also made a smaller movie. And they made this small movie called I Am David. They filmed it prior to the Passion, but it came out after. And it was just dwarfed by the Passion of the Christ. That took all the attention. It sucked all the air out of the wind that year. But I Am David is... I told Peyton, she hasn't seen it yet, so I don't want to... No spoilers here. But I told Peyton that Jim Caviezel, who plays Jesus, and the Bulgarian fellow who plays Pilate, reprise their same characters in a movie called I Am David. They play the same roles. And that's all I'll tell you. But I Am David is a movie about a boy who grows up in a communist concentration camp and then escapes and tries to find his way to freedom. And it's a powerful movie. I recommend that you watch it prior to eating dinner. I recommend that you put on the menu that night Italian. Have Italian food. Make sure you have fresh baked bread that's hot out of the oven, and be prepared to serve that about 45 minutes into the movie. Basically, there's a part where some of the characters are having an Italian dinner in the movie, and if you could combine those two things, that would be good. So that's what we're going to do later today. And I Am David is a type of Christ. That movie is maybe not meant to be, but it is, and I think you'll find it really touching, really moving. So, but what about the Diminishing Christ? I mean, I love the photo we've got for this thumbnail. As a matter of fact, I love it so much we've used it before. But this Jesus is for least doesn't quite fit what we're going to be talking about, but it's not too bad. The Diminishing Christ came to me from a recent interview that Christine, my co-host on Voices in the Wilderness, and I just did with somebody who had deconverted from Christianity, and that will be released shortly as soon as we edit it. And it wasn't one of our live interviews, but we were talking to a fellow who had come into the faith, been very excited about it, and then left the faith. And we were listening to his deconversion testimony and just asking questions along the way and trying to walk with him as he took us through his experience in the church. And I think the thing that moved me the most, I mean, it's a difficult story to hear because he's been through a lot. But I think the thing that struck me the hardest, I guess, was how much he talked about the church and Christianity and how little he talked about Jesus. And not to say that Jesus was small in his mind, but his whole perception of Christianity and his experiences being of being a Christian have very little to do with Jesus. And it made me reflect, and even his leaving the faith had very little to do with Jesus. It had more to do with the church and being let down by Christian apologists and other things that didn't really... Jesus barely came up at all in an interview that lasted about an hour and a half. And I'm not singling this fellow out. This is common. We see this over and over and over again. People's reasons for leaving the faith. Jesus isn't even in the top 5. And when you get down to it, it turns out that I mentioned to Peyton this morning, Jesus in modern Christianity has been cast in a minor role. I think that's the best way to say it. He's not the leading man in his own story. In our church experience, coming out of dispensationalism, I think Paul was the central character. Paul's writings, and we would have said at the time, oh, well, Paul's writing, the words and the doctrines of the risen and glorified Christ. I think that's what the Sunday school answer we would have given you. But people who would have come into that church and sat there for a while, at least until my last 3 years as a pastor, where I really focused on the love of God and tried to center around Christ, it would have been a verse-by-verse approach, going through the Pauline epistles. It would have been more focused on doctrine and dogma than anything about Jesus. As a matter of fact, I heard multiple people express despair over the thought of teaching anything outside of the Pauline epistles. So my father once taught the Gospel of John and Hebrews, and it almost started a church split. I actually did start a church split that he went outside the Pauline epistles, and so I had a little more freedom than my father had. But it just really is striking to see how many debates between apologists and atheists, how little of it has to do with Christ. And when it does come to Christ, it really isn't about what he taught. It's not really about some life moments. It's not about Jesus and the woman at the well, or Jesus telling the story of the prodigal son to the to the Pharisees, it's about the resurrection. It's just about the proof of God. We're going to prove God. We're going to, Christianity, from an apologetic standpoint, is no longer interested in persuading skeptics or reaching those who might not have heard the good news, the gospel story. And it's more about, pinning or defeating the atheists, owning them online, usually with a kill move. The atheist is seen, or the skeptic is seen as like the big boss at the end of a level of a game, some kind of video game, and you've got to use your kill move and destroy him. And we're going to write books and videos and have conferences showing you how to have these great kill moves against atheists and so forth. And so Jesus has become smaller and smaller. It's kind of the opposite of what John the Baptizer said when he said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." When John said to his followers, "I must diminish and he must be magnified. I must get smaller so he can take the stage," right? Jesus, some would say, has exited stage left. Some would say he's just a minor character. We haven't gotten his place in the script yet, and we probably won't get there. Reformation churches are more interested in that. For a while, it was their main interest was to defeat the Catholics. Now their main interest is to defeat the Wesleyans, or the Free Gracers, and to prove tulip. Very little about Jesus again. And some people, apologetics is just about defending the Bible, and Jesus plays a very small role in that. To William Lane Craig and others, it's about defending, the cosmological argument. This poor fellow had a whole Christian experience spanning 5-6 years. I think that's right. I think that's fair to say. No, it might have been 7 or 8. I think he became a Christian in 2013, and he just left the faith within the last year, so almost 10 years. This fellow spent 10 years in a typical church experience in Middle America, and very little of his testimony, both coming into the church and leaving it, had to do with Jesus. Coming into the church, he was married a series of promises by caring people who cared about him. But the promises he was made was he was in despair over a personal loss, and they said, if you accept Jesus, you'll have more peace in your life, and you'll have a more, I don't want to say they sold him the prosperity gospel, they didn't, but because this is a typical evangelical appeal that your life will get better. The reason you're not having a great life is because you're not in right relationship to God. And if you get in right relationship to God by joining this church, praying this prayer, becoming a Christian, that you will have all these benefits that the natural man doesn't have. And he came into the church looking for that kind of a peace, and he never found it. And so he exited. And 90 minutes later, we're talking to him, and Jesus had barely come up in his whole experience. He had bad experiences with church. He had bad experiences with Christians who judged him, not because of his lifestyle, but because he differed from them in doctrines within the church. And so he was, he didn't feel loved. He certainly wasn't loved. He felt like an outcast. And again, this is not something that isn't typical. So my question for you is, what is your experience? Honestly, what is your experience? Maybe, most people who watch this show have left the church. And they're not in church today. They're sitting at home, maybe having a coffee and a bagel, and listening to our show, which is a very different experience. Why are you laughing?
That's the first thing I said when I got on.
When you were making
as
fun
you.
of me, the
Yeah.
coffee and the bagel remark.
You say that every day.
Mm.
Every Sunday.
Skip intro. What was I going to say? What was I? Where was I going with that?
You do that every time too.
Where was I going with that?
Most of them are in the faith.
Oh yeah,
But they got
people who
coffee and
listen to the
bagels.
show, you might have given up on church, or this might be supplemental to your church experience, which seems a little bit too cookie cutter for you, right? The 3 poems, 3 points, and a prayer kind of thing. You go in, special music, collection plates, announcements, all that. Maybe that's not satisfying to you, and you come here to be challenged, and you're thinking, I got to ask you, does Jesus feel like a minor character? Now, Peyton's ruining my Batman thing right now by like using one color on the whole thing, which is unlike you. I think you were thrown off because I started it, but there was a movie. It's one of my favorite movies actually, but Batman plays a minor role in it, and it was a Batman movie. It was the second of the trilogy by Christopher Nolan where Joker, Heath Ledger as the Joker, kind of steals the show. And I don't really want to compare Christianity to that, where the Joker's stolen the show. But Bible doctrines, the Bible is the main character. And it's one of the 40,000 interpretations of the Bible that has become the main character in Christianity. And so where are you going to feel love in that? When it's all about what you believe or what you know, and that kind of tribe you're in. And if that's what you're promised, if you're promised a whole new life and an easier road, or a road that's more bearable, and you get in it and you find out that not only is that not true, but the people in your ukulele group are nicer to you than the people at church, or the people at your chess club, or your automotive club, or whatever, are actually treat you with more courtesy and kindness and respect than the people in your church or in so-called Christianity. Now, don't think I'm just picking on the church, because if you look at the data of how people view the church here in America, and the top things that come up are always hypocritical, that the church or Christians are hypocritical, that they're judgmental, or that they're bigots. Those aren't really, that's not the characteristics that you would like to hear. If you meet somebody who goes to college with your kid, and you say, hey, what's the word around campus about so and so? The word around campus about so and so is that he's a hypocritical, judgmental bigot. Probably going to bring Junior home and say, what's going on, right? If you run a restaurant and those are the top 3 things that people say about your restaurant, the food's bad, the service is bad, and everything's overpriced, you're going to have diminishing returns. But this is much more serious, because we've taken the Lord's name, and we don't want to take it in vain. The God of the Old Testament says to Israel that the heathen, the people outside the faith, curse my name because of you. And what was he saying? Well, their behavior had misrepresented the character of the God they worship. Their own behavior, his own adherents, his own followers had maligned him, had slandered him by their own conduct, their behavior, their words, what they were known for. their intent, their desires, how they acted in the marketplace, how they treated their neighbors or mistreated their neighbors. So this is all something that we need to take seriously, and it begins really with us, with the individual. Where is Jesus in your life? What role does Jesus have in your Christianity? Or is your Christianity more centrally focused on your particular denomination? Is being a Catholic more important to you than elevating, magnifying, and glorifying Christ? Is being a 5-point Calvinist more important to you? Is being an evangelical on the right side of history, very politically motivated Christian nationals, is that more important to you? Is that your good news? What is your good news? Is your good news dispensationalism or creationism, Calvinism? What is your good news? One of the questions, and we're almost going to end, and you're not even close to being done. I don't know what the heck you've been doing.
Coloring.
We're almost at the end here, and I just wanted to say, now I forgot what I was going to say.
It's your fault.
Where was I going? I was a little distracted this morning because I was sitting on the right, and that's a whole different feel over there. Talking about Jesus and our connection with Jesus as far as our worship goes, is Jesus a minor character in your relationship, in your faith? And that's something that we have to ask ourselves. Don't ask of our neighbors. Don't ask of your wife or your spouse. It's something we have to ask of ourselves. But one of the things, and here's where I was going to go with it, and we'll end on this. One of the things that I always ask somebody who I'm talking to who has gone through deconversion or left the faith, or who is going through deconstruction, and quite frankly, I would ask any Christian this just to see where they are, and it's the easiest thing to ask to see where a person is on their relationship with Jesus. And it's not proof of the resurrection. What I ask them is, what is your favorite teaching? What's your favorite moment that involved Jesus, from the Word? What's your favorite teaching of Jesus? What's your favorite story of Jesus? And you'd be surprised how many people have a hard time with that one. They're not sure. They haven't thought about it. And it's quite remarkable when you consider, if you ask any other follower of a philosopher, let's say, they have an answer for you. If I ask somebody, who's your favorite philosopher, and they tell me Diogenes, I'll say, what's your favorite story about Diogenes? And they'll tell me the one where he meets Alexander, and he's laying down on the side of the road, and Alexander's bodyguard are about to spear him and kill him because he didn't have the courtesy to stand up in front of his emperor and show respect, and he stayed laying down. They're about to kill him, and somebody says, oh, it's Diogenes, and Alexander stops them from killing Diogenes, and he walks up to him, and they meet each other, and Alexander expresses his admiration for Diogenes, and he says, is there anything I can do for you, anything up to half my kingdom? And Diogenes says, stand out of my light. And this is the famous moment where Alexander says, were I not Alexander, I'd be Diogenes. And Diogenes repeats it. If I weren't Diogenes, I'd be Alexander. This is a great moment. There's a moment where Diogenes insults Plato by getting his rug dirty. A lot of moments in the life of Diogenes. Or if I say, what's his favorite teaching? People might say, I love the fact that he believed in living simple, and in the idea that the more things you accumulate, the more anxiety you accumulate, because you have to worry about those things. And how he saw a little boy once say, Diogenes lived on the street, and the only thing he owned was a little cup to drink water out of, until he saw a little boy cup his hands and drink from a spring, and then he threw out the cup. If I ask somebody, why they like the Chicago Cubs, they can speak to it for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Why you hate the White Sox, they could go another 3 hours. If it's a favorite sports team, if it's a favorite personality, a favorite actor, but definitely if it's somebody they follow philosophy. If you ask a Marxist, if you meet somebody and they say, I'm a Marxist, and you say, well, what is it about Marx? What have you read, or what's your favorite quote from Karl Marx, or what's your favorite idea that Marx, brought into the world? You kind of expect them to be able to say something, right? You kind of be able to expect them to quote a chapter and verse on Marx and not on their church's confession or their creed or something else. And yet Jesus, you talk to many Christians, you say, what about Jesus is moving? Well, he rose from the dead. Yeah, now you're getting into the whole argument about apologetics. All right, let's take away the miracles for a second. What teaching of Jesus moves you? No, I'm not saying no. Please, I'm not saying that there are no Christians out there that won't say, well, the Sermon on the Mount, and they'll be able to quote from it because it is the greatest sermon ever given. I think you can. I'm not saying there aren't people out there that can do that. I'm just saying there's a whole lot of people out there that get confused by that question, and they shouldn't, right? If I'm asking you about your favorite actor and you tell me it's Jack Nicholson, but you don't know of any of his work, something's wrong. Something's strange there. You've never seen Jack. You can't name any of his movies. Where this happens a lot in an English class, where somebody's supposed to do a book report or something, they never read the book and they get caught, because the teacher asks them a question about the book that's a simple question that anyone who's read the book should be able to answer, and they can't get you there. So I think Jesus, if there's going to be any hope for Christianity in the Western world, especially in the United States of America, Christians need to put Christ back in Christianity. Not in Christmas, not fighting with the Fox News banners and wrapping yourself with the flag and trying to own the people at Target or Starbucks. No. We don't need to put Christianity back in secular stores. We need a resurrection of Christ in our thinking, in our hearts, on our tongues, in our experience. Our Christian experience shouldn't be one that's defined by our experience at church. It's got to be bigger than that. And when you meet somebody who's defined by Christ, the love of Christ, and it's flowing through them, you don't need a whole long testimony. You don't need creative apologetics to corner people, they want to know more. As Madeline L'Engle said, just if you show them the beauty that is the Christ, they'll want to know the source of that light. They'll be more curious. If you really want to see movement within the Holy Spirit, you look at somebody who was, let's say, had political impact. Martin Luther King Jr. The movement that a group of Christian-inspired leaders would fight for political outcomes, and yet they would fight without arms. They would fight with love. They would refuse violence, even if they were treated with violence. This is something that's striking. This is something that's otherworldly. So you could look at Mother Teresa, Teresa of Calcutta. You could look at Martin Luther King Jr. You can look at Father Malachi. You can look at the Christian next door, or Christians around the world who you could truly see the love of Christ flow through. And you know what? It's not doctrines that move people. My mother's remembered for her love and for her interest in other people and for her ability to welcome them, to make them feel seen and heard and loved. And if you ask anyone, well, you know, what are some famous quotes from Mary? They might remember one or two, but they remember how they felt in her presence. And I think we need to start with Christ again. We need to throw out all the accoutrements that have become a distraction or baggage. All those things that characterize the top of the polls for the reason people won't consider Christianity. Hypocrisy, bigotry, judgmentalism, republicanism, Calvinism, creationism, all those things that have gotten in the way and have diminished a clear view of who Jesus is and was and what he spoke to and the amazing story that is Jesus the Christ. I've met and I talked to people who've left the faith. They find Jesus boring. They find Christianity to be shallow, and yet they love Lord of the Rings. And they don't realize that, you know, their love for both Gandalf and for Strider is a picture of Jesus. So they love Jesus when they see him in Lord of the Rings, or they love Jesus as Aslan. But the Jesus of Christianity is not beautiful to them, even though when they find those characters that Jesus has inspired, they're in love with him. That is something that is convicting. That we've strayed from the story that every man wants to believe is true. This is what J.R.R. Tolkien said of the gospel on that famous walk with C.S. Lewis. Is the gospel that you'd share with somebody a story that every man wants to believe is true? Something that Christ turned on its head when for thousands of years religions had taught that men must sacrifice their lives for God, and then comes Christ, a God that sacrifices himself for man, for his children, for his sheep. The good shepherd, the great shepherd. Is this the gospel message, or is your gospel message, we can make America great again? Or you'll have more success in business, or your children will respect you more, or it'll fix your marriage, or all those things that aren't going right with your life will get right if you get right with God. What is our gospel? That's it. That's all I want to leave you with. So what do you got, Poe? Just see, Poe, you picked this easy coloring book today because you thought I'd be doing it. You thought you'd be teaching and I'd be doing it all day. And so I like this, though. You got Catwoman, you got Poison Ivy. So speak of a minor character, Poison Ivy's a minor character, you know. But that's pretty much the role of Jesus in Christianity today. He's just Poison Ivy. And Batman is, I don't know, Pauline doctrine or the Catholic Church or John Calvin, who knows. Anyway, You have anything to say?
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah. I think, though, if we're talking about Jesus, Batman is not a good metaphor. I think a better metaphor would be Zorro or even Robin Hood when we're talking about a good metaphor for Jesus. Maybe we'll do that one day. All right. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll see you next week.